Well, it's finally time. The quest for the 2022 Stanley Cup reaches its climax, with the Stanley Cup Final officially underway. Welcome to the J&J Podcast, where we discuss all things hockey from around the world. I'm Jackson Starr, joined alongside Titus. Today, we will discuss the coaching carousel in the NHL going on right now, the new ownership in Music City, and the topic of cap circumvention, which has come up a lot over the past few days. We'll then finally dive into and preview the Stanley Cup Final between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Colorado Avalanche, which the Avs now currently lead 1-0. It is Saturday, June 18th. Game 2 goes tonight from Ball Arena in Denver, Colorado. So, first we'll get into some news around the league. Lots of head coaching moves over the past week or so. John Tortorella goes to Philadelphia. Cassidy fired by the Bruins and ends up in Vegas. Luke Richardson has been linked to the Blackhawks in Colorado. And Trotz, a lot of news circulating around Barry Trotz, potentially in Winnipeg, maybe in Nashville under management. We'll get to all of that. But first, Jake, I'll invite you in here. John Tortorella in Philadelphia, head coaching the Flyers. What to make of this move? It's a young squad in Philadelphia that needs to kind of develop its way through a rebuild. Is Torts the right coach for the situation? Is he maybe not? Is he the perfect coach for the situation? What do you think about that move specifically?
I think the Torts hire makes a lot of sense. I mean, yes, of course, there's the whole brash style of Torts going with the brash city of Philadelphia. I mean, yes, it's a match made in heaven. But in terms of like what he can bring to the table, I think it's a perfect fit in Philadelphia. He's not necessarily the coach that, well, gets enough credit because he's, not necessarily liked by the media. He's definitely said some comments that are a little bit old school. And a vast number of players, such as former Columbus Blue Jacket Brandon Dubinsky, do not like him. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a great hire because, first of all, you've got Cam Atkinson there. He was recently acquired from Columbus, and he actually was one of the first people to take to Twitter to celebrate the move. He's happy about it, and, he's had a great season so far, so maybe he could even bounce back into prime Atkinson form there. But, I mean, you said it perfectly. They're a young squad. I think this is definitely a team that's had not necessarily locker room issues, but they need to fix their locker room to a certain extent. They really need a general in there. And yes, they had that with players, but as they reshaped their decor, those players have since gone on to different teams. And so I think bringing Torts in is a great way to solidify the locker room. Maybe you get even a run-in or two. He's usually good for that. Definitely a short-term move. I don't see him lasting more than maybe 3 to 4 years as he's done with other teams, but I think it's a great one. I think it's perfect for the team, and I mean, even Carter Hart as an example, this is a goalie with a lot of potential. He's shown it in flashes. He's even shown it, in his rookie season and all that kind of stuff. And you look at the kind of goalie that Torts coaches, right? You take it back to Columbus, right? Sergei Bobrovsky. Bobrovsky in Columbus was insane. It was incredible. You take it back to Vancouver, right? You've got Roberto Luongo. You've got prime Corey Schneider. Like, these are fantastic goalies. And so I think this is the perfect opportunity, not just for this squad, but for Carter Hart. And I think really this is a match made in heaven.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to agree with you on certain points. I do think that, there are very few coaches in my mind that draw so much attention when they're hired. Like, for example, Brandon Dubinsky, like you said, took to Twitter to go against what the hire, at least. And then Atkinson, on the contrary, was very, very excited to welcome Torts in. There are very few coaches that draw that much attention from current and former players on social media when they're hired based on their past reputation. I mean, Torts has that past reputation, with the media, with everyone. Going to Philadelphia, a place where, lots of coaches, lots of media are under scrutiny. We've seen clips of what Brizgalov has said in the past in Philadelphia years ago, and that's still not relevant necessarily, but still, you can go and look it up, and it's popular today. Those clips are very, very popular around the hockey world today. So, Torts has the ability to really command and control an organization in the sense
narrative,
that the narrative,
too.
exactly, very, very good word. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for sure. He's He's very assertive, and that's maybe what the Flyers need. They're kind of stuck. It felt like they're kind of stuck in a sense of like, where do we go next? What do we do now?
Hmm.
They don't really have a direction, and maybe this gives them a certain direction that they've been looking for. I think it's a good hire as well, like you said, and we'll see
Hmm.
what comes next in Philadelphia. It's going to be interesting to see.
Hmm.
So next up, Bruce Cassidy. I'm curious to know what you think about the firing from the Boston Bruins, because that, I guess, caught a lot of people off guard. He's never missed the playoffs. Obviously, the Bruins are going to be beaten down very much so physically next season. Not going to have a lot of their star power on the roster to start the year, and for a good portion of the beginning of the season as well. He goes to Vegas very quickly. A good coach who gets swallowed up by a team looking to get back into a good position. But I want to start off with your opinion on why the Bruins really got rid of Cassidy after such a successful tenure with the club.
Well, I think a lot of it has to be put towards their kind of position as a team. Like, you look at the team, their stars are aging. I mean, yes, of course, David Pastrnak and Charlie McAvoy are still in their mid-20s. They're still going to be fantastic players, hopefully for the next at least few years, maybe half a decade, before they start to trail off to even the great category. But you look at guys like Brad Marchand, you look at, of course, who we spoke on the podcast about earlier, Patrice Bergeron. Um, these are players who are on the wrong side of 30, but are still playing at more than an elite level. I mean, Marchand, he's been fantastic. He's really turned it up a level since going over the hump of being 30 years old. And, I mean, Bergeron's been such a dominant player on both ends of the ice for the last 15 years. And so, given their situation and given the way that their team is kind of built, they need a coach that can not only win in the regular season but also in the playoffs. And yes, Bruce Cassidy, he's proven that he's able to win to some degree in the playoffs. He's also struggled a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then you also look at what happened with Cassidy in the regular season. One of the big things about Cassidy's team is that he can turn depth players into just very, very good shutdown forwards analytically. You talk about the Per Lindholms and the Anders Bjorks and the Carson Coolmans. And, I mean, these are guys that, for the most part, either came out of nowhere, they were waiver bait, and he made them perform. And he made them be able to shut down, the best top sixes around the NHL, which is no small feat. But you look at it this year, and you look at kind of the fourth line of the Boston Bruins, and they just haven't been able to do that to nearly anywhere near that extent. And so when your kind of signature style isn't working anymore, and you have such a small window of opportunity, I think the writing was almost on the wall. Mm-hmm. I think it was just starting to be written. It might have been a little bit premature, but I think the more interesting thing is that when he got fired, one of the first things he said to the media is how happy he would be to take pending unrestricted free agent Patrice Bergeron from the Bruins to wherever he lands, since they both have a great working relationship.
Interesting.
And then you also hear about like the front office turmoil with David Pastrnak on his extension, and how he won't sign if Sweeney's still there. And so it looks like it's going to be an interesting few years in Boston.
Yes.
Really interested to see what Bruce can do with Vegas. Of course, they have a short leash for their head coaches. They've gone through 3 and 4 years.
Yeah.
A bit ridiculous, but nevertheless, let's see if this shiny new toy can work.
We shall see. It's going to be interesting to see. Moving on right away, Luke Richardson, Habs alternate associate coach, I should say, linked to the Chicago Blackhawks, the Hawks who fired their coach earlier this season, their initial coach, and of course had Joel Quenneville for a very, very long time prior to the kind of new wave of coaching that's come in over the Blackhawks. So Luke Richardson, a very, very steady piece behind the Montreal bench. He took over for Dominic Ducharme when he got COVID during the Canadiens' playoff run to the Stanley Cup Final in 2021. Richardson really coached the series against the Vegas Golden Knights in the third round, did a good job at rallying a group that had lost their head coach, and eventually got that team to the Stanley Cup final. A guy who has a lot of pedigree as a assistant coach and a head coach in certain respects throughout levels of hockey. Just overall a very, very good coach and a very good guy, long-tenured defenseman, of course, in the NHL. And we'll see if it works out in Chicago. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Jake.
I do want to mention one more thing. He was also an assistant coach for the Ottawa Senators as well, and he was a former player for the team. And I think this is very important.
Yeah.
Because not only is Kyle Davidson from Ottawa, which, I mean, yes, that doesn't really make that much of a difference. I mean, of course, he might have his favorite players growing up, but I'm not even thinking about that because, in fact, Kyle Davidson, well, guess where he first got his job in hockey? It was with the Ottawa Senators in the same organization as Luke Richardson. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they end up making that hire just because of the connection that they have.
Yeah. And also you could see, I mean, from a Montreal perspective, I guess, Luke Richardson has such an impact on young defensemen. Like, he and Alexander Romanov have been videoed discussing, working together a lot over the past 2-3 years or so. And, that's something that you need in an organization. If you're a head coach and you kind of bring that element, I mean, obviously we can't tell what goes on in those discussions, but you can tell, if you're willing to listen, if you're a young player and you're willing to listen to a coach like Luke Richardson, who's been there, done that at every level of hockey, that benefits your organization. So I think it's a very good fit in Chicago. I think it would work. I think he'd be a great head coach as well. And he said, Kent Hughes, who addressed the media, of course, for other reasons the other day, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Luke Richardson, he mentioned that Luke Richardson would only leave Montreal if it were a head coaching position. So he's not leaving Montreal for an associate job. It's going to be a head coaching job if he does leave. So I would not be surprised if that's Chicago, and I would be very, very pleased and happy for Luke Richardson if he does end up with the Chicago Blackhawks for sure. Next on the list of coaches potentially on the move, or definitely, in fact, on the move, that is Barry Trotz. So he could potentially land in Winnipeg, his home city, or end up back in Nashville as management. So there are a lot of rumors about Trotz in different areas. Obviously, a very, very long-tenured NHL head coach, a guy who's had a lot of success with multiple organizations. So, a guy who could potentially fit in a few spots. What do you see, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, Barry Trotz, he's been, working in the NHL in some capacity since the Nashville Predators have existed.
Yeah.
It was the first team that he was a part of. He was the head coach there. And, he's had such a long tenure in the NHL. And, as he actually, one of the places that he wanted to go to the most was the Philadelphia Flyers organization when, he was fired from the New York Islanders, and it came out that apparently his mind might have changed because he was offered what would have been the highest salary for an NHL coach. I believe it was like $8 million per year for 4 years, literally more than McKinnon is making, which ridiculous. Yeah. But, I mean, to be fair, for Trotz, it's justified to an extent. Yeah, I mean, he turned it down. And it was his decision and not the team's decision to not follow through with that offer. And so, obviously, you're thinking of what other teams are available, and there really isn't much. Maybe, Columbus, as I'm not too sure Brad Larson has been given an extension as he's been the interim coach for most of the season. And obviously Chicago is another, team that might be interested in Trotz, but, it wouldn't be shocking if they end up, if he ends up going back to the Nashville Predators.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be a good fit. And I think that coincides with our next point as well. The fact that the Predators are being sold, in fact, to a former Tennessee governor, Bill Haslam, who's the brother of the current Cleveland Browns owner, Jimmy Haslam, who just recently signed Deshaun Watson, the NFL quarterback, to a ridiculous contract, but that's another story. Could this finally signal the end of David Poyle's long, long, long tenure as Nashville's general manager? He's been there for what feels like an eternity, and
Since the team existed,
exactly,
yeah.
yeah. So it is basically an eternity. No. So anyway, his obviously relationship with the current owner, Dave Poyle, that he has. So if he is relieved of his duties, does maybe Trotz fill that void as a general manager or some type of other position in management? Who knows? But needless to say, change is coming. It seems like in Nashville for sure with this move to sell the franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing to mention there is the fact that he could be taken on as an advisor role if Paul isn't relieved of his duties after
Yeah.
this season. Of course, this is just speculation. I don't
Yes.
think he's necessarily done much to be fired, besides the fact that he is the longest tenured general manager in probably NHL history
Hmm.
at this point.
Yes.
He has the most games played or under him as a general manager in NHL history. He's
Hmm.
been working in management since the 80s, um,
Crazy.
which is just
That's
ridiculous.
crazy. Yeah, that's crazy.
He's 72, and so I think, to a degree, he probably needs a protege, because I'm not too sure he's going to be doing this into his 80s, although I wouldn't doubt it.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, Barry Trotz going back to the place that started his career, it certainly makes a lot of sense if, things go awry in Winnipeg.
Yeah, I definitely agree and could potentially see that happening. Both things coincide fairly well, so we'll see. The next, I guess, story on the ledger is a trade that happened a couple days ago between the Montreal Canadiens and the Vegas Golden Knights. Evgeny Dodonov actually traded this time to the Montreal Canadiens for Shea Weber, or maybe a more realistic way to look at it is Shea Weber's contract. And we're going to separate this into two parts because there are two different, I guess, sides to every trade, of course, both teams. But this one in specifics, just two different ways of looking at it. So from a Habs perspective, Dodonov has 1 year left on his contract at $5 million in salary cap. So
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be interesting to see if he fits into the team. Do the Habs potentially move him this offseason, which has been maybe a discussion point in the media a little bit? Do they trade him at the trade deadline if they are looking to once again build for the future? Do they maybe ship him, as mentioned, this offseason for something at the draft if they want to move up? There are a lot of potential storylines to what the Habs want to do with Dodonov, and obviously a very interesting guy who's been in the NHL for a while, coming back from playing in Russia.
Yeah. Well, since he has made his return to the NHL, because yes, he was in the NHL before.
Yeah.
He was signed by the Panthers in 2017. Fun
Yeah.
fact: he was actually playing with the Panthers.
Hmm.
Although he did have a small stint in Carolina in their AHL team. Anyway, nevertheless,
Yeah.
since coming back to the NHL with the Panthers, you've seen many faces of Evgeny Dadonov. On Florida, he was just a complete all-offense, high-energy goal scorer, fantastic on the power play. He had a really good wrist shot and a really good slap shot that had great accuracy and also great power as well.
Hmm.
On Ottawa, you know, Sens fans weren't exactly happy with the production, to say the least.
Yeah.
But he did prove to be at least capable as a two-way player and was able to score in some key moments over the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Montreal Canadiens. Sorry
Yes.
about that.
No.
But, since going to Vegas, he has blossomed into a true defensive forward. He's put up very good analytics that would put him among the best forwards defensively. And he's also rekindled his offense a little bit. Personally, just based on his trajectory and his age, I wouldn't be surprised if he's used in some sort of a defensive role still in Montreal, perhaps to anchor down some of the lesser defensive players and more offensive players like Gallagher or even Dvorak if he's still with the team. I think overall, you could even throw him on a line with Drouin because Drouin doesn't really have that much of a shot.
Yeah.
And he's more of a playmaker, and so maybe throw. I know this sounds like hell potentially, but Hoffman together with Dadonov and Drouin to some degree, And I mean, you have somebody who could shoot the puck, somebody who's at least good at tipping, and is a great net front presence, and Dadonov, and you have a playmaker there, so that could be a solid, third, second line even.
Yeah.
And so overall, I think it's a very solid addition by Hughes.
Yeah.
And I mean, he'll be good for sure. I don't really think this can backfire much. I mean, it is only a 1-year contract.
Exactly.
I wouldn't expect a return to form to being a 70-point, 30-goal scorer, but maybe, 25 goals, 50 points. Also, he's fantastic on the breakaway. I think, literally 10 out of 13 of his goals in Ottawa were on the breakaway.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a good acquisition. I think it's low risk, like you said, low risk, and there's good reward to it as well, because even if he doesn't stay in Montreal after this contract, you can ship him off at the deadline if the team's not having necessarily a great year again for assets for the future again, like the Habs did this offseason, or this trade deadline, that is. I think that, something that could be interesting is the fact that he played with Mike Hoffman in Florida. He was on a line with Hoffman. It's going to be curious to see if they do find chemistry again in Montreal, and if so, who's going to center that unit? Could it be Dvorak? Could it be Jake Evans? Could it be, it most likely won't be Nick Suzuki. Could it potentially be Shane Wright? Wink, wink. We shall see. Anyways, so there are many storylines, ways to look at it. I also think from, this kind of leads into part 2 of this, which is talking about cap circumvention and stuff like that in Vegas specifically, but for Montreal, it has to do, a lot of the questions in Kent Hughes' press conference revolved around Carey Price, because when does it not in Montreal? But anyways, Weber gets shipped off, and Weber's contract for a while had been rumored to go on LTIR, which is what Vegas is most likely going to do. And if Price cannot play anymore in the NHL, which is still to be determined this offseason, that contract is going to have to go on LTIR. And so Kent Hughes said that he didn't want to have, if Weber's contract is also on LTIR for the next 4 years, he didn't want to have the risk of having $20 million on LTIR, because then he, as Kent Hughes mentioned, he could go on for 30 minutes about the rules of the cap, or the rules of the, the collective bargaining agreement, and, could go on for a long time about, the rules of that, and how potentially the Habs could end up losing the amount of money they could spend based on having $20 million on LTIR. So it's a very interesting situation. I think that it was a low-risk move to try and get rid of this contract as quick as you could, because I don't think Weber is going to ever play in the NHL again. And, it was one to kind of get themselves out of that situation, and they acquire a good player who could, again, bring in more assets in Evgeny Dadonov in the future. And one thing I think we should mention before we move on is the fact that Shea Weber was a terrific NHLer. I think he's a Hall of Famer. Never won an Norris Trophy, but, basically led the Predators for so long, led the Habs to the finals. I think he was major leadership reason as to why the Habs got to the finals in the first place last season. And, just a terrific NHLer, terrific leader, renowned around hockey, a known figure in the hockey world, will remain that way for many, many years to come. So all the best to Shea Weber as he moves on to Vegas to an extent, but then on to probably LTIR for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I think there's also the fact that, looking at it, obviously this is cap boot for Vegas. Weber is only making, I believe, $6 million over his next 4 seasons.
Yeah, exactly.
$3 million this upcoming season, and then $1 million per year for the next 3 years, despite having that $7.8 million cap hit. So, obviously here, Vegas is trying to use this discrepancy between his yearly salary and his cap hit to essentially pay for cap space.
Yeah, exactly.
And this isn't even the $6 million. Like they're only going to be paying probably about $3.5 to $4 million of it because of insurance that he'll get from being on LTIR.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think it's great that we do have to mention just how good of a career Shea Weber's had. I believe he's had over 600 points as a shutdown defenseman. which is ridiculous.
Crazy.
Winner of hardest shot competition at the All-Star, multiple-time All-Star. I mean, this guy should be a Hall of Famer. If it was my decision, I'd even make him a first ballot Hall of Famer. That's how much I think he's impacted just, the game defensively.
Definitely.
But, he's a fantastic player, and I think I think the NHL does have to do something about, these loopholes. And it's not just this, it's also the rumor that apparently Duncan Keith might be considering retirement. And just because Chicago originally signed the contract and not the Edmonton Oilers, that they might receive a cap credit. And Edmonton, that is. And Chicago would actually would lose, I believe, his salary, which is about $3.8 million next season. And so it'd be almost like he was there, but of course he isn't. And it's not just that. It's not even with, just the contracts as well. It's also, I think the draft is extremely flawed because you look at Minnesota as an example.
Yeah.
Right. Philip Johansson, former first-round pick, 24th overall in, I believe, 2018. He was a questionable pick at the beginning. He was projected as a late second, early third-round pick. Gets selected in the first round. Has a rocky couple of years since the draft, but he was starting to get back on track. But they let him walk. Now, why did they let him walk? It wasn't because he didn't want to play for the team. It wasn't because he was injured. It wasn't because he literally was dead, so they literally he couldn't play for the team. It was because they would receive a compensatory second-round pick if they did, and they valued that second-round pick more than him. Now, I get why this rule exists, because under certain circumstances it makes sense. I mean, you look at Alexei Cherepanov, former 15th overall pick by the New York Rangers. He died a year after he was drafted, and so it makes a lot of sense that they would receive compensation because he never got to sign.
Yeah.
Or Mathieu Chouinard, right, of the Ottawa Senators. When he was drafted, again, like 15th overall.
Yeah.
Funny enough, he didn't want to sign with the Ottawa Senators, and it was his decision. He didn't want to do it. And so they received a second-round pick, which ironically they drafted him with it. But nevertheless, it made sense that they got compensation because the player didn't want to sign with the team.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be compensated for your mistakes.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be compensated because you drafted poorly. Like, they should institute a rule saying that the player has to have been offered a contract and they had to have rejected or otherwise be unable to fulfill their contract, whether it's retirement, illness, injury, etc., to receive the compensation. Because otherwise, I mean, you're literally giving gifts to bad GMs.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. Before this situation with Minnesota, I didn't know basically that was the rule,
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that it was for those circumstances where, if a player is, for whatever reason, unable to play or sign with the team, they get compensated. It makes sense. It's the right move. It's fair. Again, like you say, it's rewarding the league it's rewarding GMs who have drafted poorly something to compensate for their poor drafting. So, I don't know. I don't think it's the right rule. I think they should change it. I agree with exactly what you said. And, as a whole, there are just some weird diddly little rules in the NHL CBA that, we don't know about until maybe it comes out in the public like this or a situation does happen. And obviously it needs to be very detailed, but in my honest opinion, the manner in which the cap kind of works in the NHL as a whole it could be a lot better. I mean, you look at what other leagues have done, not to say that they can do exactly this situation, but in the NBA, if you draft a player, no matter what, you can spend to keep those players on your team, but you cannot, if you are over the cap, spend any more to bring players in. Now, not to say that makes sense for the NHL necessarily, but I do think that there are better situations where you can find a solution to resolve these ways to, you know, that we've seen teams get around the cap in the past, you know? So,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. There are many ways that they can try to improve this. Will it be improved? Probably not in the short term, at least not in my mind. I think things will stay based on what Gary Bettman said in his press conference as well prior to the Stanley Cup Finals. So it's an interesting situation and one that will be discussed for a long time in hockey, like it has been in the past, you know. So we shall see. I also think it's very interesting. One last thing, the fact that Gary Bettman addresses this, and then the next day later, the biggest dead contract in the NHL gets traded. I mean, there were discussions about that on Twitter, but it's just. It's quite ironic. It's quite funny. It's quite Gary Bettman in my mind. But anyhow,
And
yeah, go ahead.
I do think that one other thing that needs to be mentioned, of course, is the fact that Philip Johansson, I mean, yes, okay. He was originally projected as a late second round pick, early third round pick. Yes, he was playing in Allsvenskan for about, 2 to 3 years and wasn't really actually producing much. And yes, even in his first season in the SHL, he wasn't necessarily that great either.
Mm-hmm.
But over the last 2 seasons, right, he's surprisingly been all right. He's been a 20-point scoring defenseman in the SHL, which is pretty good. These are great numbers. He's still 22, and he just got signed by the Vancouver Canucks.
Interesting.
And so, what I have to say about this is that I really hope that he pans out.
Yeah.
Because I think this would be the biggest fuck you to Minnesota for letting this happen. And I know, they're doing it because they were allowed to do it. But I think it's just ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous that this is even a situation that can occur.
Yeah.
And I think,
sure.
Funny enough, if you look at draft models, there's about 22 different players that have similar kind of trajectories to Philip Johansson, apparently. According to, I don't remember what the draft model is.
Okay.
But I'll find it later. But nevertheless, 5 of them made the NHL full time.
Interesting.
And so, I think it's entirely possible that Philip Johansson could become a regular NHL player, play, more than 30 seasons in the NHL. And if he can do that, and he could turn into a solid 2-way player, which he was originally projected as on draft day, hey,
how about that?
I'd take that over a second-round pick.
Yeah, definitely so. Definitely. So moving on, we're going to move on to a signing out of Europe in the Detroit Red Wings, who signed goaltender Juho Olkinuora, tough name to pronounce, that will drive a lot of broadcasters crazy this season, to a 1-year contract. And the 31-year-old goaltender who won gold for Finland at the Olympics, definitely going to help the goaltending situation in Detroit. Good signing by Steve Yzerman. Jake, what do you got to say about him? A very, very good deal, in my mind, for the Detroit Red Wings, just based on the fact that it was an area in which they struggled last year, but now the tandem with Alex Nedeljkovic, who's looking for a bounce-back season, I think it works out quite well in Detroit for what they're trying to do, and that is improve on what they built last season coming into this next year.
Well, first of all, not just the Olympics this past year, but also the World Championships.
Yep.
And there's a lot more to be said about Juho Olkinuora. But the main thing is that this is a player that I've been following for quite a while. And obviously as your kid, you're looking at the NHL games, and you're looking at the players who are all across Europe, and you're looking at the players who are all across the AHL and all that. And these are names that you don't necessarily think of much, but for whatever reason, Juho Olkinuora did stand out for me. But I'll tell you why. So he came over to the U.S. as a 17-year-old from Finland to go play midget. And this was technically, I believe, the year before his draft year to the NHL. And he grew a liking to the North American game, but he did decide to go back to Finland for 2 seasons. In his draft year, he didn't put up good numbers. Mm-hmm. The year afterwards, same thing. And so he didn't get drafted, obviously. And he decided that he would try once again in the USA because he did have some success there.
Okay.
And he got an opportunity to try out in the USHL to rekindle his spark, basically, and to give him a chance to play college hockey, which apparently he was being recruited when he was playing midget.
Mm.
Now the thing is that funny story about this. He did try out. He had a tryout lined up for one of the teams in the USHL,
Okay.
but he wasn't confident that he was ready, and so he actually tried out for another team beforehand as a warm up. And he didn't think he would make the team, so he didn't think it mattered. They ended up giving him the starting position.
Really?
And
Wow.
he accepted. So he came back, he played in the USHL, and again, the season started off very poorly.
Mm-hmm.
But by the end of the season, he was putting up crazy numbers. Like, I'm talking, like, not even joking, he was putting up 940 save percentages
Wow.
over 10 games to end
Crazy.
the season.
Wow.
And he had, again, above 910 save percentage in the playoffs. This ended up getting him a commitment to Denver.
Okay.
And from there, he played very, very good in college. He ended up getting signed as an undrafted free agent by the Jets. But again, didn't really succeed that much and was mostly an AHL guy. This is where I came to know the name UC Olkinuora.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, after the 3 years of his entry-level deal, he didn't really see any success. He didn't see any way to improve in North America at the time. So he went back to his home country of Finland. Played one season in Liga. He ended up winning the Champions League.
Mm-hmm.
And then he decided to sign in the KHL. And this is truly where his career took off. Even though he was about 26 at the time, he would become a stellar goaltender, posting 920, 930 save percentages,
Wow.
In full seasons. And while this is happening, he was, of course, getting nominated to play for the World Championships, where he would win gold at one point. And, the Olympics as well. And this past season, of course, he did the World Championships again, where he was the starting goaltender. And not only was he the starting goaltender, he won MVP of the entire tournament and had a 956 save percentage, if I'm not mistaken.
Crazy. Wow.
This is, truly a remarkable goaltender.
Yeah.
I think, he might need some adjusting to North America. But then again, he did play college and he did play junior to some extent in North America, so I don't think it should be too much of a transition if he has the preseason. But nevertheless, I think this is truly a goaltender that can at least back up Nedeljkovic and be a very solid backup, maybe to a lesser extent of a Francouz as a comparison. But potentially, he could be a guy that could compete with Nedeljkovic for the starting position, because I don't think Grice is going to be even close, just given the way he's played this past season.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd agree with that Grice point. But yeah, no, it's an interesting storyline. I mean, I had no idea coming into this deal who he was, what his backstory is. So, it's a very interesting storyline, trajectory. He's obviously 31, which is, on the wrong side of 30 for a lot of hockey players. Goaltenders, though, could potentially pick it up later. They're a bit different. So, going to be interesting to see how he slots in. It's obviously only a one-year deal, so low risk if he does once again start the season off, like you said, in a bad form, which he has a history of doing so. So it's going to be interesting to see, and obviously a storyline to follow. Very, very good one as well in Detroit, and one that I think a lot of people will hope for the best of him, going forward in Detroit. They're kind of a feel-good team, the Red Wings, right now, so it's going to be interesting to see if they can, again, add this to their feel-good story as they progress towards potentially a playoff spot in the near future. So, ready to move on to the playoffs? I think we are.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So, some playoff autopsies. We'll start with the conference finals matchups that went on in the Eastern Conference. Now, I believe we both got this series wrong. Maybe you picked the Lightning, but I took the Rangers, I remember. So, we'll talk about the Rangers, with the Lightning defeating the Rangers, and New York. What can be said about them? A terrific, terrific run for the New York Rangers. They go up 2-0 against the Lightning. Looked like they were going to compete to defeat Tampa and go to the finals, but Tampa, man, they just storm right back and take down the Rangers. So for the Rangers, what's next? It was a terrific run. They have the goaltending. Their forward depth is very, very strong. That was proved this playoff run at least to a degree. I mean, they have that young line of Lafreniere and Kakko as well. So what's next for the New York Rangers, would you say, as they go on from an impressive run to the conference finals?
Actually, you're incorrect. We both said the Bolts would win. Fun fact.
Oh, really? Actually, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
Never mind.
But then again, I said Bolts in 6. You said Bolts in 7.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, the Bolts did end up winning. But I think one thing's for certain: the New York Rangers are definitely way more legit than we thought.
Yeah.
We were coming into this thinking that they were a team that, of course, they had their top line, and yes, they added some extra depth as well for the playoffs in Andrew Kopp, who we really didn't think was, going to have as much of an impact as he did. But man, they really are a good team. I think they do have to navigate the salary cap waters this offseason a little bit.
Yes.
And I think they do have to see some improvements in some of the younger players. Like, for example, Lafreniere, who, yes, he's been great, don't get me wrong, but he's been playing a very limited role. And so I really need to see, next season, him in the top 6 and see if he could continue that pace, playing the big boy minutes, I guess you could say. Of course, you've got Capo Caco, who, well, yes, at one point was contending for first overall in that draft. At this point, it seems like his development has been a bit skewed. He was scratched, of course, by Gerard Gallant in the series because the team needed to win, according to his words. And he's been thrown under the bus a little bit by Rangers fans. I think he really needs to take a step forward in his development next year. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's given somewhat of an opportunity there. And furthermore, of course, Vitaly Kravtsov making his way back to the team, just signing a contract with the Rangers. He's been all right in the KHL. I think he'll probably be an NHL player next year. Who knows? Maybe he could again slot into that top 6 or top 9 and be a productive player. I think. As his team's starting to get older, Mika Zibanejad is 29, but, Chris Kreider's above 30, Artemi Panarin's about 30 as well. They do need to make the most out of the next coming years, and I think a lot of the young... It's very funny to call players like Lafreniere and Kakko depth, but with all the young depth that they have, all these great prospects and young guns, I guess you could say, that are really starting to come into their own, like Adam Fox and Condre Miller and all those players. I think this is a team that should be in the hunt next season, but I also think that they should continue to buy this offseason and, try to make the most out of the next couple of years. Yeah. I think the Rangers are legit. Yeah. Really legit.
I agree. I mean, I think it starts off with the goaltending. I mean, we've spoken about Shesterkin in the past on the podcast, but just if you have the goaltending, you have an ability once you get into the playoffs to make a run. Because if he gets hot, a goalie like Shesterkin, if he gets hot, we've seen what he can do. He was terrific these playoffs. So and you see Vasilevsky in Tampa do the same type of thing. So it's if you get a goalie, if you have a goalie who has the ability to steal games in the playoffs, once you get in and you have the ability to once again continue to produce when you get in, that sets you up well for at least a good few runs with that goaltender. So at least that's in my mind. So they have the ability to make those runs with Shesterkin, and I think again, like you said, it's surprising to call Lafreniere and Kakko depth, but they are depth on this team, and it bodes well for the future of the Rangers. Once Panarin, Zibanejad, and Kreider do get older, and the core kind of shifts to Lafreniere, Kakko, Fox, Miller, Shesterkin, they're still going to find a way to be competitive if they can keep those guys on their roster. Obviously they're going to have to play some cap jungling around, something like that, but still, it bodes well for their future again, and they are definitely a legit team next year, the year after, and in my mind, in the next little while for the Rangers. A very successful rebuild, retool over the past few years for the New York Rangers. Moving on to the Western Conference, we've got the Avs and the Oilers. So the Avs sweep the Oilers. And for Edmonton, it was a really storybook run. They take down the Kings in 7. Then they defeat the Flames in the Battle of Alberta in 5, a series that many projected to go longer than that, but the Oilers do a very good job at shutting down the Flames, and the Top Guns take care of business there. Then they go up against Colorado, and they were just too much for them. A lot of different storylines and question marks for the Oilers going into the offseason. Ken Holland addressing a lot of different things in his press conference. Jesse Puljujarvi with the question mark if Evander Kane needs to be signed. The goaltending situation is that looming one at the top. So a lot of different storylines for the Oilers going into the offseason.
I think it's very easy to knock on Ken Holland. Just given what he did, in the fleeting years of his time in Detroit, and his trouble to navigate the salary cap era, just in general, I think it's really easy to knock him. But you also have to commend a little bit what he's been able to do. I think he's made some pretty key additions to the team that have actually, turned the team up a notch. Of course, everyone was always talking about the Edmonton Oilers as a one-line team. I think what this playoffs have proven, that they're probably not a one-line team.
Yeah.
I can't say for certain, but they're probably not. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins has been with the franchise his entire career, but he's blossomed into a great complementary piece. And even if he's not on the first line, you've got Zach Hyman, who they brought in from the Toronto Maple Leafs, who's been great, just fantastic this playoffs. A lot of people were concerned about that cap hit and thought that maybe it was a bit of an overpay, but he's really proven that he's worth every single penny, and even, some more in this playoffs. They've got a lot of really good depth as well in terms of, young prospects. Of course, you've got guys like Ryan McLeod, who was also very impressive this playoffs. Dylan Holloway got an opportunity to play in the playoffs, although wasn't much of an opportunity. He should be interesting next year. Kyler Yamamoto has turned into a great player, and Jesse Puljujarvi, as you mentioned. Apparently, they might be looking to move on from him, which I don't agree with. I think they should definitely do whatever they can to keep him in Edmonton. I think what he provides a very solid two-way game as a power forward as well. He can impose physically in the corners while also being, able to more than handle his own defensively. People have been actually arguing that he could develop into a Nichushkin type, which I think would be very instrumental. You look at how good he's been with the Colorado Avalanche, literally the team that they faced off against and lost to and got swept by. If he were to turn into a Nichushkin type for the Edmonton Oilers, I think, this team, in terms of their forward core, is just about set. It's almost there.
Yes.
Evander Kane, of course, he's a star player. Given, what's going on in his personal life. He is a star player, and he's going to want to be paid like one, especially with what happened monetarily.
Yes.
And it might be something that they might have to break the bank for, or it might be something that, they might have to shut down the casino a little bit early.
Yeah.
Which, it does suck. You do have to make sacrifices, especially in the cap era. But I feel like even if they were to let go of Evander Kane and they were to let him walk because he's asking for too much, I feel like they could replace him. I feel like their forward depth and their prospect pool is good enough for that. So I don't think it's as dire of a situation as it's being made out to be. I think really the defense and the goaltending are the two biggest situations. Defense-wise, it's just too offensive. You've got Cody Ceci, you've got Tyson Barrie. Darnell Nurse, yes, of course, he's a physical defenseman. I wouldn't necessarily classify him as somebody who's great defensively. He has his moments and lapses in judgment, and they happen far too often for the amount of minutes he's playing. He's a good defenseman, very good defenseman. He's probably worth most of his contract. But I think you really need somebody to balance out those minutes for him, take the load off a little bit, and he'll probably end up playing better because of it. And furthermore, the goaltending. I mean,
Yeah.
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 we already talked about Mike Smith being the most interesting goalie
Yes.
in the NHL.
Maybe of all time.
Maybe of all time. Maybe of all sport, honestly.
Yeah.
But he may retire. I think you look at the way he took the loss, and he definitely felt like he gave it his all.
Yes.
Despite what people may say online at some points. He definitely looked quite disheartened, and he has until, I believe, July 1st is the deadline he gave to make up his decision about retirement. Furthermore, Mikko Koskinen, and this had been rumored since the playoffs have started, has signed in Switzerland, so he won't be back. I think that's a shame. He is an NHL goaltender, even if he lets in a few softies here and there.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
I think he's been a good NHL goaltender and at least a backup goaltender. Since his time joining the NHL, if not even a potential tandem goalie, I could see him working out at points. You've got, of course, Alex Stalock, who they acquired from Minnesota during the shortened seasons. He really hasn't been the same since his injury. He's posted 860s in the minors. I don't think he'll be coming back next year, given that he's 36 and not producing in the AHL. You've got Ilya Konovalov. This is another player that they drafted, I believe, in the third round. He's 21 years old. His contract's already been terminated. He didn't produce in the minors, and he's already going back. Furthermore, Olivier Rodrigue, another guy who the team had a lot of high hopes for. Of course, he played on the Team Canada World Juniors as one of the goalies. Fantastic QMJHL career. Again, he's really struggled in the AHL. And so their last hope in nets at this very moment is Stuart Skinner. And Stuart Skinner, trust me, is going to be an NHL goaltender next year. Without a doubt. Even if they were to bring in a backup, I'm fairly confident he'll probably beat out that backup. But he's not a starter yet.
Yeah.
They need a starter. They need to target a starter as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Now, of course, it doesn't have to be a long-term starter. Could be a short-term solution. Maybe they could go after a Marc-Andre Fleury. A real short-term solution. Potentially only a year. But they need it. Because this is a team that should be in the position that they were this past season. And if it wasn't for goaltending, the story could have been different.
Yeah, definitely so. I agree. I think that it depends on the direction they want to go. Like, if they want a more long-term solution, could they just sign a guy to a long-term deal or maybe acquire someone through trade? Or do they, like you say, bring in a Marc-Andre Fleury for a year and, that kind of determines a bridge gap towards where they're going to try to figure out where to go long-term with their goaltending? Because whatever it is, like you say, they do need it, and they need it now. Smith was good enough to get them to this point, I guess, to a degree, and getting them to the third round. But, if you're a team who's looking to compete for a Stanley Cup, you need to have, like we've mentioned before, you need to have that goaltending. And they don't,
And just remember what I said about the coaching style of the Edmonton Oilers at this very moment.
Yeah, exactly.
He forces guys to the outside to take low danger shots.
Yeah.
Mike Smith is one of the worst goaltenders when it comes to low danger shots, and he was able to take this team to the third round.
Yeah.
If you have a guy that truly, just can save the easy ones. You take like a Linus Ullmark, right?
Exactly.
And you throw him, or even, honestly, Phil Grubauer.
Yep. Exactly.
Philip Grubauer.
Yeah.
You look at what he was able to do on the Colorado Avalanche. He was facing very, very, very low amounts of high danger chances, and he was a fantastic goaltender. He's since come to Seattle, where under Dave Hackstall, despite having very good defensemen, defensively they've been quite a mess. His numbers have just shot down, and it's because of his inability to make those high danger saves all the time.
Yeah.
You throw him in Edmonton, and I wouldn't be shocked if he comes back to at least Vezina, contending numbers. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of options.
Jack Campbell.
In free agency, there's.
I wanted to slip the name in there. I wanted to slip the name in there. I don't know.
It could be an option, to be fair. I see more of as a high danger goalie.
Yeah.
Like, he's very good against high danger chances. His rebounds aren't great, which I feel like for the system, there's going to be a lot of rebounds because there are a lot of low danger chances from the outside, which means a lot of blocker saves and a lot of glove saves.
Yeah. So,
less going to the chest, but which, I mean, I guess for him, he's known for squeaking a few in underneath his armpits, so I guess that's good. But yeah, I think I mean, it could probably work.
Yeah, they have their options. It's going to be interesting to see what they do because, like we've said, they do in fact need it. All right, moving on. We've got the two teams remaining in the 2022 Stanley Cup playoffs. For the Stanley Cup final, it's the Tampa Bay Lightning and it's the Colorado Avalanche, with the Avs leading the series 1-0. Game 2 goes tonight, Saturday, June 18th, from Ball Arena in Denver, Colorado. We'll start off with the Avs. Obviously, of course, we discuss both teams and then do our predictions for the series. We'll also, for this one, do our Conn Smythe predictions based on who we have winning the series. So, firstly, we'll start off with the Colorado Avalanche. They came into the playoffs with a 56-19-7 record for 119 points on the year. Cale Makar leads the way in points for the playoffs with a 5-goal total, 17 assists, and 22 points in 15 games played. Nathan MacKinnon is second, 11 goals, 8 assists, 19 points in 15 games played. And Gabe Landeskog is third, 9 goals, 10 assists, 19 points in 15 games played as well. The starting goaltenders, we've got 2 down because they've made enough starts, both of them have. Darcy Kemper, who started Game 1 of the finals, has played 11 games total with a 7-2-0 record, a .268 goals against average, and an .895 save percentage. While Pavel Francouz took care of business against the Edmonton Oilers, playing 6 games overall in the playoffs, not just, of course, against the Oilers. A 6-0 record for Francouz, with a .286 goals against average and a .906 save percentage. Last year, they defeated the Blues in 4 games, a clean sweep of the Blues, and lost to the Vegas Golden Knights in 6 games. This year, they defeat the Nashville Predators by sweeping them aside. Then they beat St. Louis in 6, team that gave them a tough ride, the hardest of all 3 they've faced so far. And then the Edmonton Oilers, they take care of them, as we've spoken about, in 4 games played. They are up 1-0 in the series against the Tampa Bay Lightning, and a big Game 2 coming up tonight. They are able to once again win Game 1 in overtime. They were up in that game. Lightning come back and tie, able to escape with a 4-3 victory. But a lot of interesting storylines still for the Colorado Avalanche. They went back to Darcy Kemper, as mentioned, for Game 1. Was that the right decision? Will that be the right decision? Will that be the decision they stick with going forward in the series? A lot of questions, of course, in net. Of course, both guys have been reliable in the playoffs in the past, so it's going to be interesting to see. They don't have Nazem Kadri. He's still out with injury. Not sure when he will return, if he will return to the series as well. Obviously, that was an advantage they had against the Oilers just because of the fact that it didn't really affect them. Does that come back to hurt them against the Tampa Bay Lightning, a team that's maybe a little bit better and deeper and more experienced in this regard than the Edmonton Oilers? So we shall see a lot of different storylines going on for the Colorado Avalanche throughout this series as it goes on.
Yeah. So the question is, do you take the better goalie or do you take the hotter goalie?
Well,
because the way I see it, you look at both goalies, right? You said 11 games played for Darcy Kemper, 7-2-0 record, very good. Francouz hasn't lost this playoffs.
Yeah.
And you look at the save percentage as well. 895 for Darcy Kemper, 906 for Francouz. Are both ideal given the situation? Not particularly. One more than the other, but even then, you'd hope for more.
Yeah.
But Francouz has been the better goaltender this playoffs. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind to say otherwise.
Yeah, I agree.
But Darcy Kemper is the better goaltender. He's been, I mean, it's tough to say elite, as, you know, the idea of an elite goaltender is, you know, almost a mystery at this point after, you know, getting Hasek and Brodeur and Roy all in a short period of time.
Yeah.
And that's not even to mention Luongo and all that. But it's very hard to label goaltenders elite in this era. But Darcy Kemper's gotten at least close to that label.
Yeah.
And he's been a great goaltender for the last couple of years at least. And they did decide to go back to him, their starter in the regular season. They did get the win, although it was in overtime. You see, for me, when it comes to my psychology, when it comes like in the playoffs, you stick with the hot goaltender. I think they should have went with Francouz. I know they got the win. And I know you could also mention the statistic that Tampa Bay has pretty much lost most of their first games of each playoff series so far this playoffs.
Yeah.
But I think having the hotter goaltender in nets, not necessarily on a comparison between both teams, but just between both goaltenders on that one team, I think you should have stuck with them. If I was Colorado, if I was Bednar, I would have went with Francouz. I would have given him a short leash, you know, if they lost or he had a bad game. Yes, of course I'd throw Kemper in. But I think you should have stuck with Francouz. I think the Kadri loss is a big one. He's always been a great playoff performer, even in his time in Toronto, although he's had his moments of anger, which thankfully it seems like he's managed since coming to Colorado. Where he's used that anger as fuel rather than, you know, to go and kill somebody and get suspended when the team really needs him. But yeah, I think the team has been very strong this playoffs. I mean, they've been strong in the regular season as well. This is really their time to shine. I mean, this is the first seed in the Western Conference. They're a team that has been considered a contender on a year-to-year basis. They've had the breakout of Cale Makar. They have a healthy Bone Byron. They have just a ridiculous amount of depth. Their goaltending's great. Their first line's great. There's so much to be mentioned. I mean, Valerie Nichushkin's been an analytical darling forever.
Yeah.
Burakovsky's been great. This is a guy that was literally, at one point, you know, debated that he could take Kuznetsov's spot on the first line of Washington if the opportunity presented itself. And he's playing middle 6 minutes on Colorado.
Crazy.
The problem is they don't have that experience. And I think that's going to hurt. It's going to hurt Colorado. But I think Colorado's also a good enough team to where I don't think it'll slow them down. And I think Game 1 proved that. I think if Tampa can bring Colorado down to their speed, this is Tampa's series. But if Colorado keeps the octane high and is able to shut down that offense or, you know, keep their offense on full motor, I think it's a very competitive series either way, but I think Colorado could take the edge. But it all depends.
Yeah.
I mean, these are truly the two best-built teams in hockey.
Yeah.
This is the perfect Stanley Cup Finals when you look at the two teams that are the most stacked on paper.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're saying that this is a sweep either way, I mean, I guess not for Tampa Bay anymore, but if you think this is going to be a 5-game series for Tampa or a sweep for Colorado, I don't know what you're thinking.
No.
This is going to be a blood and guts war until the end.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I don't know. I've spoken to a lot of people, obviously, since the series has come out, and I've said to pretty much everyone, it's basically the two best teams in hockey, going back to basically the season before COVID, or the season that COVID hit, 2019-20. You know, you look at the Avs, you look at the Lightning, based on the regular season standings and the way that both of these teams have finished, and then obviously the playoffs with Tampa going to 2 straight cup runs, and the Avs not being able to get over that hump over the past couple of years, and not being able to get to a place where they can be where Tampa is and competing for a Stanley Cup. So it's a clash of the Titans. It's the two best teams in hockey, and it's great for the Avs. I think they have what it takes. I think that, though, going back to the goaltending situation quickly before we move on to Tampa, Darcy Kemper, as you mentioned, was their guy during the year, and for me, Game 1 for the Avs was like very, very important to get that win. If you lose the game where you're well rested and the other team isn't at home in Game 1, that's going to be tough to battle back from in Game 2. I mean, yes, they did have 2 days rest before tonight's game, but I still think that it was very, very important for them to win Game 1, especially getting ahead of Tampa, because Tampa got better as the game went on. They improved. They seem a bit shell-shocked at the beginning, Tampa, especially Vasilevsky as well, at the beginning of the game, to see like, oh, okay, we didn't really expect it. The Avs came out very, very offensively. I don't know. They were flying in the offensive zone in the early goings of the game. The Bolts were caught a bit off guard in my mind, but they settled down as the game went on, and I think that'll be the case for the rest of the series. But I do believe the Avs have what it takes to compete with that better than maybe any team that Tampa's faced so far. So we shall see, especially at the Stanley Cup final level. The Bolts played the Stars and the Habs, both heavily advantaged in both of those series. The Avs are probably their biggest test come this time of the playoffs over the past 3 years, so it's going to be interesting to see if the Avs can put that test to the limit against the Tampa Bay Lightning and try to get over that hump that they've been trying to get over. As for the Tampa Bay Lightning, and of course they come in having won back-to-back Stanley Cups. On the season, they were 51-23-8 for a total of 110 points. The playoff leaders for points this season, Nikita Kucherov leads the way with 7 goals, 17 assists, and 24 points in 18 games played. Terrific for Kucherov. Andre Palat has also been very, very, very good for Tampa. He's got 9 goals, 8 assists, 17 points in 18 games, while Victor Hedman's got 2 goals, 13 assists, and 15 points in 18 games as well. The starter, as we've spoken about, is Andrei Vasilevsky. In 18 games played, he's just gotten better and better as the series has gone on, as the playoffs have gone on. 12-6-0 with a 236 goals against average and a 926 save percentage last year in the playoffs. They took care of the Panthers in 6, then the Hurricanes in 5. The Islanders gave them a test, but they were able to get by them in 7. And then they take down the Habs in the Stanley Cup final to win the Stanley Cup. And that was their second in a row. This year, they beat the Leafs in 7, the Panthers in 4. They sweep the Battle of Florida. And then they come back and reverse sweep, sort of, against the New York Rangers in 6 games after falling down 2-0 in that series. And, of course, looking for their 3rd straight Stanley Cup. They have the pedigree. They have the ability to do it. They have the goaltending. Obviously a tough team, as we've spoken about, in Colorado going up against them. But can Tampa Bay three-peat and, be on top once again of the hockey world?
I think it's certainly possible. I think, like I said, this one's really a crapshoot. Yeah. I mean, it could go either way. Yeah. You're better off flipping a coin than picking a winner.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right.
I mean, even in the guys that they brought in, they have pedigree. I mean, yes, people have said, okay, Corey Perry, right? He's made the finals the last 2 years, which is an accomplishment.
Yeah.
People don't see it as an accomplishment, but it's an accomplishment. But he lost the last 2. Yes. Who did he lose it to? The Tampa Bay Lightning.
There you go.
And it's not just that, but it's also the fact that he's previously won the Cup in 2007, which we won't talk about. I mean, he's already a proven winner. He's going for his 2nd go-around. This team is going for their 3rd. Patrick Maroon's going for his fucking 4th.
Yeah.
This is a team that literally I mean, yes, they have nothing to lose. Quite literally, they have nothing to lose.
Exactly.
They've won it all. They've seen it all. They've seen the glory. They battled through the glory, and they've won it. They haven't won it once. They've won it twice. They know what it takes to win. And whether it's that will get them over the Colorado Avalanche, or whether it's just the fact that they're a really stacked team, and they just happen to win, the coin flip.
Yeah.
It really could go either way. I think, Braden Point came back for game one. I think that's very important. He's a very good player. He's an elite player, truly. But he is injured. He's playing injured. He missed the interview after game one because he was rehabbing his injury that he came back from playing. And, this is a team that, they're battling through adversity, but they've already been there.
Yeah.
I don't know what else there is to say.
No.
Hedman did have a bad night on game one. Again, could he be injured? We're not too sure.
Yeah.
But I think the only way that they could really slow down is if the wear and tear of the playoffs could slow them down. And in that case, I could see it, dropping to 6 or 5 games.
Yeah.
But really, like I said, this is a war.
Yeah.
And again, you look at each series. They lost game one, I believe in round one. They lost they didn't lose in game two because it was a sweep.
Yeah.
But they lost in series 3. They lost game one. And Vasilevsky didn't have a great performance in each of the game ones of all the series, including Florida, I believe.
Yeah.
And you consider this, right? But then you also consider how good he's been since then.
Yeah.
He has a .926 save percentage despite those poor efforts at the beginning of each series. Again, if Vasi's hot, it could be Tampa. But like I said, this is a complete crapshoot.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and I think it could be a series for the ages. It's really like one of those that we could remember for a very, very long time, just based on the pedigree of both these teams, the star power, And something for Tampa in my mind, I've brought this up so many times, I think in each of the podcasts when we discuss Tampa, is they have the pedigree. They've won the cup, they've played a lot of hockey over the past 2-3 seasons, a lot of hockey. But does that fuel them on even more to, get to a point where, we're almost there? They are genuinely 4 wins away from being the first team to win 3 straight cups since the 80s. That's, in this era, just like unthinkable almost, So maybe that gets them over the hump to kind of spur them on. And they're coached so well. John Cooper is a legendary coach at this point. So, they have the pedigree, they have the ability to do it. This, in my mind, is their toughest opponent yet. And it's going to be their biggest challenge at the bitter end to try and see if they can win their third. So
Speaking of which,
great. Yeah, go ahead.
Furthermore, one thing that I read is that actually, if you're looking at on a opponent basis of the playoff teams that had the hardest road to the cup, this past Lightning team, I believe, is top 5 in that regard.
Crazy.
It's no doubt considering that they faced off against Toronto, who many, whether it was delusional Leaf fans or whether it was just media pundits saying that this is a team that was ready to win the cup. This was their year. Fantastic team. They've got Austin Matthews. They've got literally so much superstar talent in their top 6.
Yeah.
And Morgan Riley and Jack Campbell was so good this past season as well. And they beat through that.
Yeah.
Florida. God, everyone was talking about Florida this year.
Exactly.
just an absolutely fantastic team. They swept them. The New York Rangers, who, yes, we didn't give them enough credit. We realize that. But man, they beat them in 6.
Yeah, exactly.
When talking about overcoming adversity, it's not just the historical, like in terms of, the year before, or even the year before that, and how they battled through adversity, and they won their first cup, and they won their second cup. And that, players like Maroon and players like Perry have won cups elsewhere as well. And they have that pedigree with that team. It's not just that. It's also the fact that they've gone down the hardest path.
Yeah.
This past season.
Yes.
They've battled through that. They've faced all this adversity. So in a way, you could see it as, well, they've already battled this adversity. This should be nothing more than a scratch. Then again, it's also the Colorado Avalanche, so nothing more than a scratch. Probably has, like, tetanus, and you should get that checked out by a doctor. But the thing is that you could also look at it and say, well, they've gone down the hardest path. So naturally, they would have the most wear and tear.
Yes.
So they're more prone to breaking down. And they're more prone to injury. And we are seeing that with a lot of the players. Like you said, Hedman, Braden Point.
Yeah.
They're looking to be injured. Or they're looking like they're being injured. I hope they're not looking to be injured. Then they might get traded to Vegas.
There you go.
The thing is that, I mean, truthfully, like, with all this time that we've spent analyzing and even doing the research before this podcast, we came up with all these points and we were looking at all these different areas between both teams to see how they would compare. And the thing is that we can't decide.
Yeah.
Like, these are two teams that are so unbelievably stacked. They're in their own level to such an extent that you can't compare which one is better in which regard. I mean, yes, of course, maybe Vasilevsky and Elliott is a better tandem than Darcy Kemper and Pavel Francouz, potentially. But also, you can't deny just how good the Colorado Avalanche is as a team in general. And I mean, yes, John Cooper is a fantastic head coach. He's one of the best in the NHL right now. But also, I mean, man, Colorado's head coach Bednar's not that bad either.
Exactly.
Like, they go tit for tat in almost every category.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is just really one where we gotta shut up and we gotta watch.
Yeah.
Because anything can happen.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Well said, well put. Good way to wrap it all up before the predictions. And again, like you said, this might be an irrelevant kind of task, but we've done it all playoffs. We're going to continue it and finish it off here. I'm going to go first, and I'm going to take the Avs in 7. Like you said, it could go either way. I think it goes the distance. I'm taking the Avs to win Game 7 at home. And for my Conn Smythe winner, I'm going with Cale Makar. I think that's the obvious choice for Colorado. It could go to McKinnon potentially if he has a great series, but Makar has been their steady guy throughout. Terrific playoff for him, and a guy who I think if Colorado does find themselves victorious in this series, he is the guy to win the Conn Smythe for them. So, but needless to say, like I said, it could go either way. Colorado, I'm taking Colorado in 7, but it could be Tampa's just as much as it could be Colorado's in my mind.
And I agree with you in the sense that it could be either team, could go either way. I'm going to go the other way, though. I'm going to say Tampa, and I'm going to say Tampa in 7, because I think if you're saying anything less, you're a fool.
Yeah.
I don't even care if it ends up going to 6 or 5, you're still a fool.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, this is a series that all hockey fans should want to go to 7 games, because every game is going to be a nail biter. Every game is going to be some of the best hockey you will have witnessed, of some of the best players in the league. With that being said, Conn Smythe, the playoff MVP. I'm going to go with Vasilevsky, the big cat.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why is because he's been just fantastic this playoffs. Of course, not at the beginning of each series, but he's a closer. He closes deals.
Yeah.
And he doesn't just close deals, he closes games as well. He's a guy that can step up and has proven, not just historically, but this past season and this past playoffs, to win important games. I don't care if the series is down 3. He could single-handedly win 3 games and make it a game 7. He's got that ability.
Yeah.
There's truly only 2 goaltenders, I believe, in the league that have that ability to just completely flip the entire world upside down and make reality whatever they want it to be. And that's Shesterkin and that's Vasilevsky. And I think Vasilevsky can do that, and because of that, and because they have, all this experience in playoffs with their team, I think Tampa's winning in 7.
Well put. Good way to wrap things up for today, and a good preview towards a good series that's about to come up, a terrific series. We've built it up so much now, the pressure's on the players to actually make it a good series, but it actually will be, though. So we shall see. It's going to
worst
be
series ever.
Exactly.
Every single game is going to be a 1-goal game.
There you go.
It's going to be the dumbest goals ever.
Yeah, it's just going to go off foots. It's going to be 2-1, like
Cow
17 shots. Yeah, or like Ruda's just going to put it through from the line, and it's just going to go in. So we shall see. But it's going to be great. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll see if we are right and who's wrong, because we obviously have different predictions. So anyhow, that should wrap things up for today. And that does it for us. I'm Jackson Starr, joined alongside Jake Titus. We'll be back after the Stanley Cup Final to do a post-playoff recap. And then, of course, we've got some off-season moves coming up. We've got the draft. We've got free agency. Just a lot of stuff coming up on the J&J Podcast. And thank you so much for listening today. As mentioned, I'm Jackson Starr, joined alongside Jake Titus. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.